Remember our spa retreat about 10 years ago? That day when we went to a spa, and that's how we approached self-care at that time. You remember that spa
Yeah.
experience?
Yeah, it's almost like little slots of self-care in our lives.
Yeah.
I also thought about in preparing for our time together, knowing that life balance was going to be a topic for you. I pulled out an article that I'd written not too long ago, but I called it "The Balance of Imbalance."
Mm-hmm.
A quote from it, if you don't mind, I'll just share. I basically, the story was about a day in the life of me running my business, being a mom, being a parent to a pet that had all kinds of adventures that day, all kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
Still, highs and lows and lots of different roles in our lives. So I said the various elements of this day, with all its highs and lows, practicalities and tear-filled moments, encapsulate for me what life balance is really all about. It's the integration of a life that's whole, rather than compartmentalized into equally apportioned slices of pie. And that's what I really encourage with my clients as well.
Yeah, I love those words of integration. Like, that's how I've spoken about, I do not promote trying to balance our lives. We have so many areas in our lives that if we try to balance, something's always going to be tipped off, right? So I love that part of integration. Mm-hmm. Give some examples of some of the habits and rituals or activities, or what you say no to in your self-care.
Well, there's a whole lot. in my self-care, some of the things that I've learned over the years are really important to me are certainly my being. So looking after my eating, my exercise, and being in nature. Travel is very important to me, and I have learned that I have to incorporate space and nature into that travel. It can't always be cities and sights.
Mm-hmm.
It has to have an element of the natural elements, and I think it's really important to listen to what works for you when your breath slows down and what's important. So those are a few elements. Saying no, we can go off into a whole tangent on what I've learned about emotional intelligence and myself. I don't know if this is the time or you want to park that thought.
If you would like to share that, because you and I know that emotional intelligence is a key part of self-care. So go ahead and explain a bit about that.
So what I know about me is my emotional intelligence and all the various parameters that involves is in pretty good shape.
Mm-hmm.
Empathy is something that is an overplayed strength for me. So I call it dialed too high. Right?
Yeah.
And that is what puts me off of, if I'm going to be at risk of losing self-care, it's going to be because of empathy and caring for others, which is it's common in our roles as women for many of us, and it's especially entrenched for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have needed to learn things like, particularly when involved with elder care, and if there are mental health issues involved, I've learned through various programs that it can be a bottomless pit of need that I can't fill up. Mm-hmm. And I have to keep almost saying that to myself as a mantra. It's not, it doesn't matter how much effort, I can't fill up that need. Mm-hmm. And so I can't give at all from a place of being completely stripped out. I have to have enough self-care to be able to give to the point that makes sense, and filling up the entire need can't be my job.
Yeah. And sometimes that's a slippery slope, isn't it? Both of us have experienced that with caring for our mothers, and actually how that zaps our emotional strength as well, seeing our family in not the best way, right? And so that actually draws on our self-care as well. And I found that was when I really needed the self-care, but it was something that took second place in the immediacy of taking care of someone else.
Yeah, absolutely. That probably, when I think back to the most defining moment times for me around the need for self-care, certainly one was with elder care for both my mom and my stepfather was hospitalized at the same time that my mom was in long-term care. Both required a lot of advocacy. The system requires you as a caregiver to be a strong advocate, which requires lots of backbone. And eventually I got pneumonia. And so the body tells you in the end that it's much, and I could not shake it. And that meant I couldn't go to the hospital. It meant I couldn't be with the people who needed me.
Yeah.
And so it was an important enough signal to say,
It does make us very vulnerable. And I think both you and I experienced as well that, we did have illness, not because of it, but it was just that slippery slope that we went down, and we weren't able to pay attention to what's going on with our own health. And the other part of that is what comes with that sometimes is that that's when we feel that we're not doing well. We're not doing well for others, or we're less than, or we're more vulnerable. And this is one of the concerns I have for the message of self-care for younger women, is that it actually feeds that feeling that we're not good enough. And I don't like the phrase good enough. We are good, and we are doing the best we can. And that emotional imbalance, because we feel vulnerable and less than, that can actually erode our self-care as well.
No question.
As an executive coach, how do you approach self-care with your clients? Because you work with C-suite clients. How do you work with them with that? Or how do you convince them that this is an important part of their life and it's not just an event?
I find I work in a number of programs that are with emerging leaders where there's a structure to the process for a full year program. They're taking in training while they're being coached, they're integrating their learning, and a very deliberate process over a span of a year. And in these programs, I've worked with probably 7 different cohorts, and we will require the participants up front to set 3 goals, 2 being leadership goals and 1 that we call a personal goal. And they, of course, think that's all just, this is nonsense. Often because it's required, but they're really not pouring their everything typically into that 3rd goal. I can tell you, Patricia, almost to a person, at the end of that year, the most profound shifts for each participant when they give their feedback comes from that personal goal. And it's not just in their, I say just in their life, because they're separate. They're never separate, right? It's in their leadership as well. Mm-hmm. They become different leaders through how they've taken on the personal goal, typically around self-care, often around wellness. It might be around a relationship, though, personal relationship. Mm-hmm. And what they've then been able to take in to their leadership, how they manage others, how they pay attention to others, how they notice when they're depleted, when their staff are depleted, any of those things. It just really rounds them out as a leader and dials up their awareness. So it's never a throwaway. And so if I'm working with an executive in a less defined program, I will always tell them when we first engage that essentially all coaching is life coaching. I will coach the whole of you. You will determine what you want to bring into this discussion, but please know that I know that the whole of you impacts who you are as a leader. So if something happened that morning with the kids, then you didn't necessarily say what you wanted to say going out the door, it's going to spill over. And so bring it along, and we'll work it through from the perspective of your leadership.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Thank you, Sue. That is such a great way to end our interview, because I don't think a lot of leaders in particular think of the connection of self-care and their relationships being part of self-care. I think this will be very valuable to quite a few leaders. Thank you for sharing your concept of self-care and how it's evolved for you. Thank you for sharing with our audience that self-care is not just an event like a weekly manicure or our spa treatment. It is not an event that you tick off your to-do list. It's a practice. And actually, it's you and I have talked about how we set up our lives as well, so that self-care doesn't need to be something that you tick off, that actually how you set up your life actually supports the ongoing self-care.